good evening. Thank you very much. It's great to be here in Clinton. As a matter of fact, I live in Clinton. I live in Clinton, Mississippi. That's where I live, so we got something else in common. It's great to be here with you tonight and to share my heart and to share my story in hopes that there's somebody here that it might help. You know, people ask me, like, gosh, Ted, what do you do for a living? I said, well, I was a professional wrestler. And he says, well, what do you mean? I said, well, I ran around in spandex tights and hit people in the head with chairs. What do you do? But seriously, I was a kid who grew up wanting to be just like my dad. Now, my biological father was a guy named Ted Wills, who's a professional singer, beautiful deep bass voice. I have a very deep voice, but I couldn't sing I couldn't carry a tune if it had handles on it. But the love for my stepfather, Mike DiBiase, who became my dad when I was 5 years old. He's the only dad I ever really knew. He also was a wrestler, and not just a professional wrestler. And then I'm trying to think, while he was still in the service in the Navy, I don't know, in 1946, he won the AAU National Heavyweight Amateur Wrestling title. And then when he got out of the Navy, then he went back to school and lettered 4 years in football and wrestling at the University of Nebraska. And that's who I wanted to be. I wanted to be just like my dad. And, trying to emulate him as I grew up. And a lot of bumps along the way. A lot of bumps along the way. When I was, just a kid, it's kind of like, it's funny to watch like how many kids can say their dad was a wrestler or their dads were on TV, and it was unique, but I didn't want to be different. But the one thing I did have, the one thing that that was very strong in me was this desire for God. Now, my dad, like most Italians, was Roman Catholic, and I came up, in Catholicism. I went to a lot of Catholic schools, churches. I was the award-winning altar boy and all of that, and even considered, like the priesthood, until I got to be about 15 and 16 and discovered girls, and I said, no, I don't think I could do that now. But my love for God was always very strong. My grandparents on my mother's side live in this town out in Arizona, down in the southeast corner of the state, Wilcox, Arizona. Interstate 10 goes around it now. You don't even have to drive through it. My grandmother had a truck stop there, Marie's Truck Stop. And when I was very young, I stayed with my grandmother a lot. I hope I'm not getting anybody confused. I stayed there. This is before she met Mike DiBiase. My mother met Mike and they got married because I stayed with my grandmother. And even at the beginning of their relationship, that was a place for me to go where I knew I was loved. And I'm just putting Wilcox in there at the moment, but I'm going to take you back there. So my mom marries Mike DiBiase. They both grew up in Omaha, Nebraska. Found out that they literally lived, not too far apart. And my dad probably, he had a newspaper route, and he probably threw papers at their house. But they never knew each other. Well, how'd they meet? Well, I have a lot of buddies who say, well, I'm the son of a professional wrestler. And that's true. But I don't have too many of my buddies that can say, and I actually can't think of any of my buddies who can say, my parents were professional wrestlers. That's how my mom and dad met. My mom was a lady wrestler. And when they got together and got married, obviously, my mother quit wrestling and became a mom. And that's how it was. But we moved around a lot. Back then, wrestling wasn't like it is today. Now you turn it on, it's on TV from coast to coast. Back in those days, they had what they called the territories. And like one of the territories was all of Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, and Mississippi. That's a big territory. Florida Championship Wrestling. Georgia Championship Wrestling. These were all territories, and you moved around a lot. And of course, as a kid growing up in it, we moved around a lot. Well, we moved around a lot. I remember I went to the, first grade, Portland, Oregon, second grade, Houston, Texas, third grade, Wilcox, Arizona, fifth grade, Omaha, Nebraska, sixth grade, Amarillo, Texas, and then back to Omaha, seventh, eighth, and ninth grade in Omaha, Nebraska, and the summer of 1969, we went back to Texas because my dad realized that he saw the skill I had as far as playing football, and he said, I'm going to wrestle for a couple more years, put you in a good Texas high school football program, because Texas is notorious for their high school football programs, and see what happens. Well, we went back to Amarillo, but on July the 2nd, 1969, my dad had a heart attack in the ring, Lubbock, Texas, and died. My whole life changed that day. Now, my mom and I and my younger brother have to go back to Wilcox, this little town in southern Arizona, and live there with my mother's parents, my grandparents. And that's what we did. And this is kind of crazy, but as time went on, my biological father, Ted Wills, he comes back to see me, and he and my mother got married again. It was crazy. So they get married, and so my biological dad's only work, he was like a light tech. He used to be he had a beautiful deep bass voice. Oh my gosh, you should have heard. I couldn't carry a tune if it had handles on it. But he was a great singer. But anyway, they went back to L.A. This is where he became a light tech. He had a crew, and he would do. They would set up like all those, like General Hospital, the dating game, the Newlywed Game, all those games. He had a crew. They did all the lighting for that, and what is his job. Well, my mother's health wasn't very well. She had to get out of the smog of L.A., and so my family, my grandmother, and we moved not to Wilcox, but to Phoenix. One of my grandmother's other sons, my mother's brother, was a coach and a teacher at a school in Alhambra. And Alhambra was a school, but it was in Phoenix, Arizona. So that's where my parents were. Well, when obviously, we just moved around so much. It's like, where are we going to plant? When my mother remarried my real dad, I didn't go with them. I'd had nothing against Ted Wills. He's actually my biological father. But Mike DiBiase is the man who raised me. Mike DiBiase was buried in a cemetery in Wilcox, Arizona. I wanted to be my dad. And so I told him, and my mother, I'm going to stay here with my grandmother. And that's what I did. And so I graduated from high school, Wilcox, Arizona, 1972, and I had an offer from the University of Arizona to play football for them on scholarship. Then I'm watching TV one day, and wrestling comes on. Folks, I hadn't seen any wrestling for 3 years, but I recognized the people in this, a very famous wrestling family, the Funk family, Dory Funk, Terry Funk, and Dory Funk Sr., and they're coming to Tucson. So, man, I went to Tucson to see him. I hadn't seen him since my father's death. Terry said, Dad, you know what? And he says, I can get you a recruiting trip to West Texas State, which is just, West Texas State is in Canyon, Texas, just about 11 miles south of Amarillo. Not a great big school. He says, if you want to go to Arizona, fine. He says, just take the trip and come back and visit everybody. And that's what I did. Well, it didn't take me very long because I always wanted to be my dad. And I know I disappointed a lot of the people in Wilcox, Arizona, who knew I had been offered a scholarship to play at Arizona, and they had gone to the University of Arizona in Tucson. And when they all found out that I was no longer going to go to Arizona. And I tell you, did I go to West Texas State to play football? Well, that's what I was on scholarship for. And of course, that's what I did. But in the back of my mind, and in reality, I went to West Texas State because I knew that was my inroad back into the wrestling business because of the relationship that my dad had with Dory Funk Sr. And both of his boys, Terry and Dory Jr., like I said, when they came to Tucson, I went to see him. I took the recruiting trip, and the next thing you know, I am going to West Texas State. And I did. I went to West Texas State for 3 years. Did fine. The summer of the summer of '75. I had 1 year of college left, and for the summer, now the NCAA changed the rulings. It used to be, once you competed in any sport professionally, your amateur status is gone for anything. Well, they changed that. They said, you can go ahead and you can wrestle and get paid for that and still maintain your amateur status in football. So that's why I went to West Texas State. And the summer before my senior year, there's an old wrestler named Dick Murdoch, funny guy, good wrestler, but he was going to work for a guy named Cowboy Bill Watts in Mid-South Wrestling, which was Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi. And he said, hey kid, he says, if you want to, he says, why don't you come there this summer and try it out, see if you really want to do this. Big mistake. So I said, yeah, that sounds great. So I go to Mid-South, and I start there. And the promoter there is a guy his name was Bill Watts. Bill Watts is a real sharp guy. He played football at Oklahoma, but he was he knew everything about pro wrestling. I couldn't have gone to a better place, and have been exposed to more really good professional wrestlers. So, man, I mean, it's eating it, and everybody's encouraging me. They said, kid, man, you got it. You've got it. You're going to go places. Well, when the end of summer came, it's time to go back to school. Nope. I said, I ain't going. And Terry tried, he tried a little bit. Terry Funk tried to talk me out of it. The one that was really mad at me was his wife. His wife's name was Vicky. I mean, I was almost like a second child to them. And I'd known them all my life too. And so she said, Teddy, you only have 1 year left. And I said, I know, but you know, this is what I'm going to do. You know, and so anyway, the Ted DiBiase standing here, 71 years old, going, yeah, dummy, you should have gone back. You only had 1 year left. You know, but that's not the guy. You know, I loved wrestling, always loved wrestling, and that's where I went. And the other thing that, in the midst of all of this, was my relationship with God. Now, when I was in Nebraska, I was the award-winning altar boy. I'm the altar boy who showed up at the 6 o'clock mass when there was 3 feet of snow on the ground. There wasn't anybody in that church but me and the priest, and he lived there. But that's how serious I was about it. My relationship with God was something serious. And you know, they say you are what you behold. What you hang around is going to rub off on you. And, you know, as I stayed, and I didn't go back to school, mistake, you know, have I ever had to use my college education? No, but I didn't know that then. I didn't know that I might not get hurt and not ever be able to wrestle again, whatever. But I stayed in wrestling. And so far, I'm doing okay. And then I got married the first time in Amarillo, Texas. And it's a marriage that should have never happened. I mean, I was like, you know, like 19, 20 years old. And it was like, from where I am now, I look back and go, why did you do that? And I had one child that came out of that relationship. The other thing is, you know, I was Catholic and my wife was nothing. She didn't go to church at all. And I thought, well, I can get her to go into church. Well, you know, she's still alive and she still didn't go to church. But my relationship with her ended. And I found myself in Atlanta, Georgia, 1987, 88. And I'm wrestling there, and it's Georgia Championship Wrestling. Okay, and so, and it's on Ted Turner's, the first cable network that went coast to coast, Georgia Championship Wrestling. And so I'm out by the pool one day, because, you know, when you're a wrestler and you're running around in spandex tights, you know, you better stay tan, especially me, because I'm white. And so I'm by the pool one day, and I see this pretty gal, and it's like, well, I'm not just going to go say hi, you know, golly, you know. And so what was funny was, one of the guys that was in this group of people that my now wife is, he was a wrestling fan. I found this out later. And he said, Ted, Melanie wants your autograph. Melanie was in the pool horse fighting, you know, get on somebody's shoulders. And she goes, autograph? I've never had an autograph. Sign my visor. Well, her visor was all wet. And I said, but I'm sure they have some stationery in the office. I'm going, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is happening. So we go in there, and I said, what's your name? She said, Melanie. I said, I wrote on that paper, to Melanie, the best looking girl at the pool, for sure. Exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point. And I dated it 4/26/81. April the 26th, 1981 is the day I met Melanie, the day that my future wife came into my life. And this is still the days of territories, and so it was getting time for me to get out of Atlanta. So I go back to work for Bill Watts. Bill Watts is Mid-South Wrestling. And so Melanie goes with me. And I wasn't very popular with her mom and dad for a while. I mean, it's their daughter, here's this guy. I'm like five years older than Melanie. And, they're thinking he's just taking advantage of her. And I told her, I said, I understand. I said, they don't realize that I'm totally in love with you. So I left Georgia, and Melanie came with me, and we went back to what was called Mid-South Wrestling. I had an apartment in Baton Rouge, and the guy that was the owner of the gym where I worked out, very strong Christian, his name was Foxy Denham. And, Foxy arranged for Melanie and I to basically to get married at his house. And so we got married at Foxy's house on New Year's Eve. New Year's Eve. I won't ever fail to remember when my wedding anniversary is. And that was the beginning of my life with Melanie. But along the way, along the path, it's like the devil's always knocking on your door. We worked 7 days a week. We didn't have days off, none. And as a matter of fact, we wrestled on the weekends. We would do a matinee in the afternoon and a show that night, on Saturday and Sunday. So we would wrestle 4 times in 2 days. That's a greedy promoter. But that's what it was, that's what you did, and if you didn't do it, there's the door. So I didn't really get to go to church much. Like I said, I'm wrestling all the time. And twice on Sundays and Saturdays. And then I decided we'd go back to Georgia for a while. We went back to Georgia. Georgia had become the same thing every day. Every day. So when my wife's parents, basically her dad, when he retired, they went back to Mississippi, where Melanie, my wife's name is Melanie, where her mother is from. And about 40 miles south of Jackson, Mississippi, there's a little town called Crystal Springs. That's where her mother grew up. And so that's where they went. And so now that I was going to go back to work for them again, I said, we'll go to, normally I would have had an apartment in Baton Rouge or Shreveport. But I went to Jackson, Mississippi, so my wife could be near her parents and our newborn son near his grandparents. And that's when things started looking better. But as far as me and my ability to go to church, that didn't get any better. Twice on Sunday. Wow. And so, where was I? I wasn't in a good place. And then, I get this break, 1987, I go back to work for Vince McMahon, and this is when wrestling explodes. Now I'm this character, the $1 Million Man, and I'm going everywhere. and doing everything. And along the journey, sadly to say, was unfaithful to my wife. We're like rock stars. Next town, next show, next party, next girl. Well, I called home one day, and I was actually in London. And boy, my wife hit me with it. She had found out some of the stuff I was doing, started looking into it. I said, I'll be on the next plane home. She says, no, you won't. You don't live here anymore. Click. First words out of my mouth, oh, God, help me. Well, another guy that I had met in Baton Rouge he was a youth minister when I met him. His name was Hal Santos. Now he's a pastor in the St. Louis area. I called Hal. Hal arranged for Melanie to drive up, from Mississippi to St. Louis. And I flew in there from London. The longest ride of my life was from the airport to Pastor Hal's house, because that's where Melanie was waiting. And I just knew that I had lost it. I just knew I had destroyed the best thing that ever happened to me. Just because I was following the crowd. Well, one of the things that Pastor Hal had to do, he was taking his youth group from St. Louis up to Chicago to this event they hold there every year. It's called the Ascension Convention. And there's like 1,500 teenagers from all over the state of Illinois going to the Ascension Convention. And the speaker was a guy named Reggie Dabbs. And boy, old Reggie could bring it. And believe you me, while he was preaching, and I was sitting there going, this guy's been reading my mail. Oh my gosh. I mean, I'm just boom, 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 getting hit like a brick. And that's the day everything changed. He gave an invitation. He said, if you know what you need, and you know it's Jesus, he says, then get out of that chair and get up here right now. I beat every kid in that building to the front. I didn't just go forward. I went forward, hit my knees, put my nose in the carpet, cried like a baby, and I didn't care what one person in that building thought. All that mattered in that moment was that I get right with you, Lord. I can even remember saying, I know that this is too much for Melanie. I know she's going to leave me. But I'm talking to God and saying, God, I give you my word. I'm going to take care of my wife and my child, even if I don't have them. All I want now is to be what you want me to be. So Melanie, she witnessed all of this. And she came to me and she said, Ted, she goes, I'm not going to make you a promise I can't keep. Because I just don't know if I'm strong enough to do this. She goes, I serve a God of restoration, not divorce. And she goes, I'm going to try. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe, after what I had exposed to my wife, that she was saying that. I serve a God of restoration, not divorce. And I said, if you'll give me this opportunity, I'll become the man you thought you married. I'll become the spiritual leader in my home. And God willing, one day, regain your trust and respect. Well, Melanie and I have now been married for 44 years. We had another boy, so we had 2 sons of our own. And then I had a son from my previous marriage who came to stay with us for a while. But my wife's faith so impressed me. I couldn't believe it. And my life changed dramatically because this is the first time in a long time that I really got serious about my relationship with God. Before that, it was, hey, it's wrestling, it's your job, it's well, that's real important, but there is nothing more important in my life or in your life than your relationship with Almighty God. And that's the day that everything changed. As I stand here before you, I'm 71 years old. I'm 30 years past having put on wrestling tights. I promise you'll never see me in spandex again. And the most important thing in my life is that relationship. Because when I'm in tune with God, everything else is in tune. My wife is, she's just amazing. Just absolutely amazing. And the fact that, her example was the greatest example. After what I told her, I said, I didn't say this openly to her, but you're really going to give me a chance? And I took that ball and I ran with it. So then other things started happening, and I started to get involved with some of the people that were in our church. I go to it's Morrison Heights Baptist Church in Clinton, Mississippi. And through that relationship, I started getting relationships with other pastors in other cities. And what I was trying to do was, I was trying to do this thing whereby, if I could get all of these pastors interdenominationally to come together, when someone in their community because every church seems to have its niche. Food pantry, one. Clothes pantry, one. A heart for unwed mothers over here, alcoholics and drug addicts over here. But they've all got their niche. But if you can get all those pastors together, somebody comes to their church and says, Pastor, I need your help. This is my problem. But that's not really your niche. You've got a great food pantry. But now you have a relationship with that pastor down the street, and now he's not a Baptist, he's a Methodist. Who cares? But he can do, that's his specialty. And that is what, and it has caught on, and there are a lot of pastors in the state of Mississippi now through that effort of mine as it started. It was hard for me to see it through. In terms of what I could do, it's like once I shared it with them, they got to take the ball and run with it. And they have. And so as I stand before you today, I'm a guy who is thankful to be alive, thankful that I had a wife who gave me a chance I didn't deserve, and just thankful for Almighty God. in all that he has done in my family. My boys, my oldest boy, Michael, is still in Texas, and, you know, he's got some issues. We'll get that taken care of. My other two boys, you know, both live within driving distance. We see our grandchildren anytime we want them, and sometimes when we don't want them. and it's the greatest thing. But that's it, you know, and all of this boils back down to God. Jesus said, "For what does it profit a man if he gain the whole world and lose his soul?" That's not it, buddy. And I don't know what any of you are suffering from or are having an issue with, but I tell you this, with all my heart, whatever it is, whatever that burden is that's on you, do not leave this church without getting it taken care of. Pastor.